Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord, and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. Then said his friends unto him, Know that God exacteth of thee less than thine iniquity deserveth. And Job answered and said, My flesh is clothed with worms and clods of dust. My skin is broken and become loathsome. But ye are forgers of lies. Ye are all physicians of no value.
What? Where am I? This place is familiar. I've not been here for years. There's something written on the door. Let's try the door handle. I don't like locked doors. I need to remember who lived here.
Oh, I am most wretched when alone, as every surrounding object reminds me of my irreparable loss. But no place on earth would at present suit me but my Berkeley home, and I trust my friends will not endeavour to take me away, for the bitter cup has a kind of relish in it here, which it could afford nowhere else.
I remember now. This was the home of that doctor. He was quite notorious in his day. I'll be soused. It's like being there all those years ago. That letter was written the day before he died. Bit spooky. That letter was written the day before he died. Bit spooky. This painting don't belong here. I'd remember an expensive piece like this. It would look more at home inside Berkeley Castle. The Berkeley family crest. Not much use at the moment. It's inscribed with the name Watley Montague. I've heard that name before somewhere. Now I don't remember there being a Turkish lantern clock in the hallway. This was a doctor's country home. He had a townhouse somewhere around these parts too. Can't remember where, but it'll come back to me. What have we got here?
24th of January, 1823. My dear William, I hear by your father that you will return in a few days to Bristol. Be assured you will take with you my best wishes and affections. I am happy to certify that no boy could behave better than you did during your stay with me at the Chantry. Pursue this line of good conduct, and you will be happy yourself, and make your father and everyone who loves you happy too. Your affectionate uncle, E.J.
My memory's still a bit hazy. This is where the doctor carried out his curious studies. I dread to think what kind of experiments he used to get up to in here.
"24th of January, 1823. My dear William, I hear by your father that you will return in a few days to Bristol. Be assured you will take with you my best wishes and affections. I am happy to certify that no boy could behave better than you did during your stay with me at the Chantry."
They called this place Chantry Cottage. I don't remember why, but there's been grand buildings round here for centuries. I need to remember more before I can go in here. This deserves closer inspection.
It was called the Chantry, from having in former times been in the possession of certain monks. It is contiguous to the churchyard of Berkeley Castle, and the tower of St. Mary's Church overhangs the southern boundary of the shrubbery.
The doctor had a lot of paintings, but I never figured out who all the artists were. That's the doctor. His eyes follow you around the room. That portable desk came with me on all my jobs. Can't believe that miserly pawnbroker only gave me a shilling for it. That portable desk came with me on all my jobs. Can't believe that miserly pawnbroker only gave me a shilling for it. That's one of them Gilray caricatures. I'll come back to it when I've explored a bit more. That's a wine cooler, and he had an impressive collection of wines in his cellar too. I wouldn't have left things this untidy. I still had my professional pride back then. It looks like a genuine work by Bassan. It's been damaged at one point, but preserved with great care. It looks like a genuine work by Bassan. It's been damaged at one point, but preserved with great care. The charred remains of a scientific manuscript. Not much use right now. There's papers everywhere. I'll come back and tidy it later. There's something special about this.
On Thursday last at 2 o'clock, a balloon was launched from the inner court of Berkeley Castle, which rose to a very great height and was visible for a quarter of an hour. The same afternoon, it was seen to
A small quantity of the serum of human blood was poured over about a square foot of grass. 3 sprinklings were given at the distance of a fortnight each, amounting to the serum contained in 40 ounces of blood. The effects it has produced on the vegetation of the grass is astonishing. It is beautifully green and thick and has sprung up several inches, while the surrounding grass has but just begun to shoot and looks of a yellowish green.
There's papers everywhere. I'll come back and tidy it later. The doctor had a lot of paintings, but I never figured out who all the artists were. That portable desk came with me on all my jobs. Can't believe that miserly pawnbroker only gave me a shilling for it. That's one of them Gilray caricatures. I'll come back to it when I've explored a bit more. The charred remains of a scientific manuscript. Not much use right now. There's papers everywhere. I'll come back and tidy it later.
On Thursday last at 2 o'clock, a balloon was launched from the inner court of Berkeley Castle, which rose to a very great height and was visible for a quarter of an hour. The same afternoon, it was seen to descend in a field in the parish of Kingscote, about 10 miles from Berkeley. The locals were so much terrified that they could not for some time be prevailed upon to approach it.
There's papers everywhere. I'll come back and tell you.
A small quantity of the serum of human blood was poured over about a square foot of grass. 3 sprinklings were given at the distance of a fortnight each, amounting to the serum contained in 40 ounces of blood. The effects it has produced on the vegetation of the grass is astonishing. It is beautiful.
The River Severn cuts through the English county of Gloucestershire, linking Bristol in the south with Gloucester. The Vale of Berkeley lies on the south bank of the river, between the two cities. This was a breakfast room. I always imagined this was a centre of family life in the doctor's home. Home-cooked food. Definitely something to come back to later. More comfort than I'm used to, but I can't put my feet up now. By all accounts, the doctor didn't travel much, but he had correspondence from all around the world. Apples from the doctor's garden. Well, he's a big fella, isn't he?
The condition of a servant would be too severe were they not allowed some time which they may call their own. In all well-governed families, a maid servant has the liberty every Sunday, or every other Sunday, of going to church. If she neglects it, it discovers she has little sense of true religion, and may well be suspected of failing in her duty to an earthly master and mistress, when she fails in that to her Maker.
A painting by the doctor's nephew, Stephen. The lady of the house had good taste in furniture. That's just a cupboard. There's no way through here.
It was the most terrible of the ministers of death, always present, filling the churchyard with corpses, tormenting with constant fears all whom it had not yet stricken.
Thus our hero, being plundered of his estate and bereaved of his children, says, "Naked came I out of my mother's..."
At length the infection spread to the palace and reached the young and blooming queen. She received the intimation of her danger with true greatness of soul. She gave orders that every servant who had not had the smallpox should instantly leave Kensington House, and then calmly awaited her fate.
Let's take a closer look.
Were your interviews for a new housemaid fruitful, Mrs. Knight?
Yes, madam. Both girls were hard-working and from respectable families, but only the Jones girl has had the pox, and plenty of scars to prove it.
Then you must select her. I will not risk the health of my family.
Ah, 4 candles.
The condition of a servant would be too severe were they not allowed some time which they may call their own. In all well-governed families, a maid servant has the liberty every Sunday, or every other Sunday, of going to church. If she neglects it, it discovers she has little sense of true religion, and may well be suspected of failing in her duty to an earthly master and mistress, when she fails in that to her Maker.
Looks like the key to a desk drawer.
Lord Dalkeith has been dead of the smallpox for just 3 days. It is so dreadful in his family. His eldest boy died of it last year, and his only brother, who it left hideous traces of its power on those whose lives it spared, turning the babe into a changeling, at which the mother shuddered, and making the eyes and cheeks of the big-hearted maiden objects of horror to the lover.
This deserves closer in. 6 children from the same family lost to the smallpox. Not every family was as unlucky as these poor souls, but 1 in 5 of those who caught it wouldn't live to tell the tale. There's something special. Beethoven and Mozart survived the smallpox with just a few scars, but many that survived it ended up blind as well. Unfortunately, not everyone who survived the smallpox could live with the terrible scars it left behind. Sadly, some even took their own lives. Smallpox was a cruel, hideous disease. It's no wonder they call it the Angel of Death. Another cupboard. I'll have to try a different way. Small cupboard, but probably bigger than my cell. That's just a cupboard. There's no way through here. Something's changed. I'm sure those stairs were blocked a minute ago.
This also gives us to consider that diseases are not only judiciously inflicted for past offences, but graciously also designed to prevent future. A little recollection will tell a man whether he has not often been kept virtuous through fear of the consequences, even when inclination has gotten the better of his duty.
His eldest son had a feeble constitution and other infirmities which rendered it inexpedient to send him to a public school. A domestic tutor was procured who was little older than his pupil, but though tender in years, he was old in wisdom and knowledge. He was lying in the last stage of pulmonary consumption. He had repeated hemorrhages from the lungs and was then evidently approaching his end. I was introduced into the sick room, and there for the first time I saw Mrs. Jenner, the anxious and constant attendant of her dying child.
Certain classes are less liable than others to consumption, either because the exhalation to which they are exposed preserve the lungs in a healthy state, or because they acquire from their mode of life a habit susceptible of the complaint.
Another cupboard. I'll have to try a different way. Nice landscape. Nice landscape.
Selected poems by the late John Dawes Worgan of Bristol, who died on the 25th of July 1809, aged 19 years.
So the young tutor died of consumption the year before the doctor's son.
I feel greatly obliged to everyone who attempts to console me in my present affliction. But you, who know so much of the human mind, are convinced how vain are these friendly efforts. I had no conception till it happened that the gash would have been so deep, but God's will be done.
He met with many discouragements, his notions having been treated with scorn and ridicule by some, and with indifference by almost all.
There was plenty of paperwork in the dining room I could look through. That portable desk came with me on all my jobs. Can't believe that miserly pawnbroker only gave me $1 for it. Let me check this out.
I have entrusted a most important matter to you, which I firmly believe will prove of essential benefit to the human race. I should not wish what I have stated to be brought into conversation. For should anything untoward happen, I should be made, particularly by my medical brethren, the subject of ridicule. For I am the mark they all shoot at.
On Thursday last at 2 o'clock, a balloon was launched from the inner court of Berkeley Castle, which rose
a small quantity of the serum of human blood. I have entrusted a most important matter to you, which I firmly believe will prove of essential benefit to the human race. I should not wish what I have stated to be brought into conversation. For should anything untoward... 24th of January, 1820...
Were your interviews for a new housemaid fruitful, Mrs. Knight?
Yes, madam. Both girls were hard-working and from respectable families, but only the Jones girl has had the pox, and plenty of scars to prove it.
Then you must select her. I will not risk the health of my family.
The condition of a servant would be too severe were they not allowed some time which they may call their own. In all well-governed families, a maid-servant has the liberty every Sunday, or every other Sunday, of going to church. If she neglects it, it discovers she has little sense of true religion, and may well be suspected of failing in her duty to an earthly master and mistress, when she fails in that to her Maker.
Certain classes are less liable than others to consumption, either because the exhalation to which they are exposed preserve the lungs in a healthy state, or because they acquire from their mode of life a habit susceptible of the complaint.
Selected poems by the late John Dawes Worgan of Bristol, who died on the 25th of July 1809, aged 19 years.
Were your interviews for a new housemaid fruitful, Mrs. Knight?
Yes, madam. Both girls were hard-working and from respectable families, but only the Jones girl has had the pox, and plenty of scars to prove it.
Then you must select her. I will not risk the health of my family.
Every object tells a story.
There nibbling at thistles stand Jim, Joe and Mary. On their foreheads, oh horrible, crumpled horns bud. Their Tom with a tail and poor William all hairy, reclined in a corner, are chewing the cud.
That's the doctor.
So your book is out at last. Well, I can tell you that there bean't a copy sold in our town, nor shan't neither, if I can help it.
He must have believed in something to have resisted so much scorn. This was the doctor's dressing room. Looks more like a laboratory. An unfortunate cuckoo, apparently. A paper about cuckoos. Not useful right now.
The doctor's previous education nor his habits gave him a relish of any of the branches of pure science. He seemed to have a peculiar horror of arithmetical questions, and he exclaimed that he would rather look for an hour at a mite through a microscope than have his time taken up with such things.
Mr. Jenner, after the most advantageous and well-attested success of the vaccine in England, I hastened to imitate this example by introducing it into the pious establishments under my direction. I am pleased to report its success and show my gratitude to one who has provided this service to humanity. The motive engages me to offer you the attached ring as a testimony of the sentiments of esteem and goodwill with which I am most affectionate. Marie.
Smoking, I am sure, is harmless if used in moderation. A man who has a pipe at his...
I can't afford to smoke no more, but I reckon I feel better for stopping. Never seen one of them before. It's got a face like a timepiece. This deserves closer inspection.
I opened the thorax of a dog between two ribs and introduced the thermometer. Then I put some lint into the wound to keep it from healing, so that the thorax might inflame. But before I had time to try it again, from the hurry of business, my dog died. If these experiments will amuse you, I should be glad that they were made. But take care you do not break your thermometer in the dog's chest. John Hunter.
There's something special about this.
I selected a healthy boy, about 8 years old, for the purpose of inoculation for the cowpox. The matter was taken from a sore on the hand of a dairymaid who was infected by her master's cows. It was inserted on the 14th of May, 1796, into the arm of the boy by means of 2 superficial incisions, barely penetrating the cutis, each about ½ an inch long.
The doctor's experiment scared a lot of people, but there is something pretty unnatural about it all. William and Mary. She's the queen that died of smallpox. William and Mary. She's the queen that died of smallpox. William and Mary. She's the queen that died of smallpox. Small cupboard, but probably bigger than my cell. The doctor's library. Dr. Edward Jenner, that was his name.
He contrived in a short time to accumulate a series of specimens illustrative of comparative anatomy and natural history, which would have formed a museum of no inconsiderable magnitude.
Looks like the French had their own issues with Jenner's vaccine. Edward Jenner, physician, scientist, and fellow of the Royal Society. I seem to remember her name was Blossom. Doesn't seem relevant at the moment.
He contrived in a short time to accumulate a series of specimens illustrative of comparative anatomy and natural history, which would have formed a museum of no inconsiderable magnitude.
Pretty nasty looking sore. Maybe I'll look at this later. The Right Honourable George Rose MP. He helped Jenner create the National Vaccine Establishment. Edward Jenner and his parliamentary friends seeing off the anti-vaccinationists.
Phipps went through the cowpox apparently in a regular and satisfactory manner, but the most agitating part of the trial still remained to be performed. It was needful to ascertain whether he was secure from the contagion of smallpox. Dr. Jenner set a great value upon these letters. They were carefully preserved in a cover which was inscribed in his own handwriting. Letters from Mr. Hunter to E. Jenner, an honour which he was not always in the habit of conferring on more dignified communications.
Jenner was a student of Hunter's for his medical training in London. Clearly they became great friends. I still don't understand why someone would deliberately give cowpox to a healthy boy. Let me check this over.
Are you in good health, James? It's been 8 weeks now since you received the cowpox.
Yes, sir.
So now we must discover if you are secure from the contagion of smallpox. We will use the... Sarah Nelms, a dairy maid at a farmer's near this place, was infected with the cowpox from her master's cows in May 1796. A large pustulous sore and the usual symptoms accompanying the disease were produced in consequence.
Edward Jenner and his parliamentary friends seeing off the anti-vaccinationists. Let's take a closer look.
His attention was drawn possibly to the nature of cowpox while Jenner was yet a youth. A young countrywoman came to seek advice, and the subject of smallpox was mentioned in her presence. She immediately observed, "I cannot take that disease, for I have had cowpox."
If cowpox wouldn't kill you, and it stopped the speckled monster, then it was worth catching it on purpose. But I don't much fancy being given the smallpox afterwards.
Towards the southern extremity of the lawn, and shaded by the thick screen of evergreens, is a small rustic apartment. Here, in the summer mornings, Jenner used to receive his poor neighbours who came for the purpose of vaccination. In this humble fane more wonders were wrought than in all the splendid temples of Asclepius.
The house feels different now. Perhaps I should look upstairs. That's just a cupboard. There's no way through here. What with him spending all that time around smallpox, I wonder why he didn't catch it himself. William and Mary. She's the queen that died of smallpox.
The doctor's previous education nor his habits gave him a relish of any of the branches of pure science. He seemed to have a peculiar horror of arithmetical questions, and he exclaimed that he would rather look for an hour at a mite through a mite.
Dr. Jenner lived through the wars against revolutionary France and Napoleon, but I don't know what role he played. This was Captain Jenner's room, Edward's youngest son. That's Oxford, where the young captain studied. What have we got here then?
Dr. Wickham, who was one of the travelling fellows of the University of Oxford, was in Paris when the command for the detention of the English was issued. The committee recommended that Dr. Jenner should immediately avail himself of his great celebrity in France and directly appeal to the Emperor.
Some kind of military manoeuvres. This deserves closer inspection.
At the end of 1809, Napoleon issued a decree that 100,000 francs should be at the disposal of the Minister of the Interior for encouraging and propagating vaccination throughout the Empire.
Case 22. From the arm of this girl, matter was taken and inserted April 12th into the arms of John Marklove, 1 year and a half old. Robert F. Jenner, 11 months old. Mary Peed, 5 years old. And Mary James, 6 years old.
Robert Jenner. So he vaccinated his own son at just 11 months old. Robert Jenner was a member of the militia, but he wasn't old enough to have fought in the wars against France. There's something special about this.
The alternative presented by the French government to His Majesty, in language the most peremptory and menacing, was the evacuation of Malta, or the renewal of war. His Majesty is actuated solely by a sense of what is due to the honour of his crown, and the interests of his people, and by an anxious desire to obstruct the further progress of a system which may prove fatal to every part of the civilized world.
Well, I'll be soused. Jenner's vaccination helped the people of France when our countries were at war with each other. Napoleon even gave him a medal for it.
At 8 years of age, Dr. Jenner was put under a preparatory process for inoculation with the smallpox. This preparation lasted 6 weeks. He was bled to ascertain whether his blood was fine and purged repeatedly until he became emaciated and feeble. After this barbarism of human veterinary practice, he was inoculated and removed to one of the stables, where he halted up with others in a terrible state of disease, but none died.
Jenner's parents. He'd have only been 5 years old at the time they died. Let me check this over.
The smallpox, so fatal amongst us, is here entirely harmless by the invention of engrafting. The old woman comes with a nutshell full of smallpox, rips open a vein with a large needle, and puts into it as much matter as can lie upon the head of her needle. On the 8th day the fever begins to seize them. Then they keep their beds 2 days, very seldom 3. In 8 days more they are as well as before their illness, and they never mark. There is no example of anyone that has died of it, and I am very well satisfied of the safety of this experiment, since I intend to try it on my dear little son.
Every object tells a story.
I have since met with a considerable number of these Africans who all agree in one story. People take the juice of smallpox, cut their skin, and put in a drop. They get a little sick, but nobody dies of it.
The Reverend Cotton Mather. This preacher died 100 years ago then.
Mr. Cotton Mather, being mounted upon a horse, addressed himself to the people, partly to declare that Burroughs was no ordained minister, and partly to possess the people of his guilt, saying that the devil has often been transformed into an angel of light. And this somewhat appeased the people, and the executions went on.
The Reverend Cotton Mather was that preacher behind those barbarous witch trials in the Americas. Let's take a closer look.
Let the atheist, then, and the scoffer, the heathen and unbeliever, disclaim a dependence upon providence, dispute the wisdom of God's government, and deny obedience to his laws. Let them inoculate and be inoculated, whose hope is only in and for this life.
The effect of the preparation and inoculation was this. As a child, he could never enjoy sleep, and was constantly haunted by imaginary noises. It is without superstition a noticeable incident in a biographical account that the misery Jenner endured in the smallpox process should have laid the foundation for the extermination of the disease.
To the memory of the Right Honourable Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, who in the year 1720 introduced inoculation of the smallpox into England from Turkey. Another cupboard. I'll have to try a different way. The doctor's bedroom, where he finally passed from this world. Another painting by Stephen Jenner. Look what he's put in the background. Probably some sort of bird you'd see down on the Seven Estuary.
Mrs. Jenner's health became evidently more impaired. She was so slender, so attenuated, and so much deprived of all vigour of constitution by protracted illness. I visited her in Cheltenham the night before she expired, and when she was in full expectation of the fatal event. She had long been preparing for her final account, but her death may be considered as the signal for Dr. Jenner's final removal from public life. He retired immediately to Berkeley, and never, except for a day or two, quitted again. He was below the middle stature, his hair dark and a little inclining to curl, and it was observed at his death that he was not the least grey. He was rather nearsighted, but never made use of glasses. His dress was black, a large collar to the coat, and loose, low trousers, the dress of the day.
Both his wife and son were taken by consumption. After all he did for medicine, that must have been hard to cope with. That's a very distinguished portrait of the Doctor. What have we got here then?
I avail myself of this occasion to render you my portion of the tribute of gratitude due to you from the whole human family. Medicine has never before produced any single improvement of such utility. You have erased from the calendar of human afflictions one of its greatest. Yours is the comfortable reflection that mankind can never forget that you have lived. Future nations will know by history only that the loathsome smallpox has existed, and by you has been exterminated. Accept the most fervent wishes for your health and happiness, and assurances of the greatest respect and consideration. Thomas Jefferson.
This thing keeps turning up. Probably important later. Jenner certainly had friends in high places. Might look at it later. Something has changed again. Vaccination wasn't Jenner's only legacy, but I forget what else he got up to. This deserves closer inspection.
Dr. Jenner's discovery is unquestionably the greatest discovery ever made for the preservation of the human species. It is proved that in these United Kingdoms alone, 45,000 persons die annually of the smallpox. But throughout the world, not a second is struck by the hand of time when a victim is not sacrificed at the altar of that most horrible of all disorders. I shall therefore move that a sum not less than £10,000 be granted, but when I do this, I declare I do not think it sufficient. If the House should think it right to adopt any larger sum, I shall hold myself free to vote for it.
There's something special.
It was his intention that it should have first appeared before the public in the transactions of the Royal Society. When the subject was laid before the President, Jenner was given to understand that he should be cautious and prudent, and ought not to risk his reputation by presenting to the learned body anything which appeared so much at variance with established knowledge. The painful disappointment which he experienced caused this design to be abandoned, and the work appeared as a separate publication.
Dear Jenner, your paper on the cuckoo has been read, passed the council, and is in print in the Philosophical Transactions. I spoke to Sir Joseph Banks about your wish to be a fellow of the...
I can't afford to smoke no more, but I reckon I feel better for stopping.
Certain classes are less liable than others to consumption, either because the exhalation to which they are exposed preserve the lungs in a healthy state, or because they acquire from their mode of life a habit susceptible of the complaint.
Selected poems by the late John Dawes Worgan of Bristol, who died on the 25th of July 1809, aged 19 years. I feel greatly obliged to everyone who attempts to console me in my present affliction. But you, who know so much of the human mind, are convinced how vain are these friendly efforts. I had no conception, till it happened, that the gash would have been so deep. But God's will be done.
An unfortunate cuckoo, apparently. Every object shall...
Sire, having made a discovery of which all nations acknowledge the beneficial effects, I presume with great deference to request a favour from your...
At the end of 1809, Napoleon issued a decree that 100,000 francs should be at the disposal of the Minister of the Interior for encouraging and propagating vaccination throughout the empire.
Case 22. From the arm of this girl, matter was taken and inserted April 12th into the arms of John Marklow, 1 year and a half old, Robert F. Jenner, 11 months old, Mary Peed, 5 years old, and Mary James, 6 years old.
Certain classes are less liable than others to consumption, either because the exhalation to which they are exposed preserve the lungs in a healthy state, or because they
Were your interviews for a new housemaid fruitful, Mrs. Knight?
Yes, madam. Both girls were hard-working and from respectable families, but only the Jones girl has had the pox, and plenty of scars to prove it.
Then you must select her. I will not risk the health of my family.
In 1978, Janet Parker became the last recorded victim of smallpox in a laboratory accident at the University of Birmingham in the UK. The virus is thought to have escaped through a ventilation shaft in the medical school where Mrs. Parker worked in the photographic department. Birmingham was braced for a catastrophic smallpox epidemic. But mercifully, she was the only person to die of smallpox in the outbreak.
Something else may jolt my memory further.
There nibbling at thistles stand Jim, Joe and Mary. On their foreheads, oh horrible, crumpled horns bud. Their Tom with a tail and poor William all hairy, reclined in a corner, are chewing the cud.
Looks like the French had their own issues with Jenner's vaccine.
The observation of the migration of birds were read before the Royal Society on November 27th in the year Jenner passed away. They were presented to Sir Humphrey Davy by the Reverend G.C. Jenner, who had the peculiar happiness to accompany his uncle in most of the investigations of the phenomena of migration.
Edward Jenner and his parliamentary friends seeing off the anti...
Are you in good health, James? It's been 8 weeks now since you received the cowpox.
Yes, sir.
So now we must discover if you are secure from the contagion of smallpox. We will use the lancet like before. Are you ready?
Something else may jolt my memory further. Small cupboard, but probably bigger than my cell. The drawing room was where the doctor would entertain his guests. Some relation of the Jenner family, no doubt.
So felt the towering soul of Montague, her sex's glory and her country's too, who gave the spotted plague one deadly blow, and bade its mitigated poison flow. With half its terrors, yet with loathing still, we housed a visitant with power to kill. Then, when the healthful blood, though often tried, foiled the keen lancet by the Severn side, resisting uncontaminated still, the purple pest and unremitting skill. When the plain truth tradition seemed to know, and simply pointed to the harmless cow, doubt and distrust to reason might appeal. But when hope triumphed, what did Jenner feel?
He was dining with a party at Bath when a question arose whether the temperature was highest in the centre of a candle flame or at some small distance from its apex. Jenner, with his usual ingenuity and readiness, soon settled the dispute. He placed the candle before him, inserting his finger into the middle of the flame. He retained it in this situation for a short time. He then placed it a little above the flame, but was compelled immediately to withdraw it. "There, gentlemen," he observed. "The question is settled."
Not the greatest painting, must have had some sentimental value. The doctor cut an impressive figure in his youth.
He could also play on the violin and flute, and he was in the habit of forming musical parties. I have seen him in his later years, after his renown had filled the world, and many cares had weighed heavy upon him, shake them entirely off and take up a humorous strain as he sang one of his own ballads with all the mirth and gaiety of his youthful days.
I think that was his brother, or maybe his father. A beautiful countryside scene. I think I should have liked to have met the doctor. He seemed like a decent sort.
Within this tomb hath found a resting place the great physician of the human race, immortal Jenner, whose gigantic mind brought life and health to more than half mankind. Let rescued infancy his word proclaim, and lisp out blessings on his honoured name, and radiant beauty drop one grateful tear, for beauty's truest friend lies buried here.
On the 8th of May 1980, the World Health Organization issued a declaration that smallpox had finally been eradicated throughout the world. Since that day, not a single case has been recorded, and future nations will know by history only that the loathsome smallpox has existed.
His eldest son had a feeble constitution and other infirmities which rendered it inexpedient to send him to a public school. A domestic tutor was procured who was little older than his pupil, but though tender in years, he was old in wisdom and knowledge.